Hey everybody, what's going on? Hexlex here. I got another Master Duel video for you all. So today we're going to come back to sprites once again. It's actually been a minute since we've covered sprites, literally since the Shizu stuff came out. That's like pretty much all I've been doing. So I want to take a little break from 60 card Shizu decks and come back to Spright here for a moment. Pure Spright in particular. And we are going to be reviewing the deck with the Nimble package once again. Last time I covered this version of the deck, I don't know if we actually had a game where I drew or summoned Nimble Beaver. I think we have at least one this time. We'll see. In any case, this is the Pure Spright deck the list rather, that I've been working with lately. It's not really too different from lists I've run in the past. We are still on the PSY-Framegear Gamma. I do still really like this card in this meta. It's exceptionally good, especially here in sprites. Being level 2, it might seem like that's irrelevant because like, oh, aren't you going to always summon Gamma during your opponent's turn? But no, sometimes you do actually get the opportunity to Gamma a Maxx or an Ash Blossom during our turn. And when you can do that, that's really good. This becomes a free Spright Elf, or just puts another level 2 on board, as well as the extra material in drivers. So I mean, this has a lot of applications beyond just being able to summon itself, though. Of course, being able to both negate and destroy is huge, especially in this meta, especially against other Spright decks, although we're not necessarily only thinking about Spright and Runick Spright matchups when teching here. Of course, we weren't only thinking about those matchups beforehand either, but there are definitely the arguably even more major contenders of the Shizu decks in the meta right now. It's really hard to say in this meta because it's still relatively fresh since the Shizu decks came out. We're not quite at 2 weeks yet. I think it's been like a week and a half now, but it's looking like Shizu, particularly the Shizu Chaos and or Shizu like Necroface Mill decks, might actually be stronger than sprites. And I don't know, looking at this latest tournament results standings and some of the Duelist Cup results that we've been getting in so far, it might be the case that even AA-ZEUS does end up being stronger than Pure Spright. I thought maybe that was the case, but I thought mostly that was just my own bias towards AA-ZEUS and how much fun I was having playing the deck. But no, the results are definitely starting to look like they're catching up with that theory. So we'll just have to see how that pans out in the future. That doesn't, of course, mean that Spright is a bad deck by any means, although I will say, as I've touched on this in other videos before, I do think that Pure Spright is in a better place in this meta than Runick Spright is, for two major reasons. One, Pure Spright has a lot more room to tech cards than the Runick variant does. You know, looking at this list here, really all we need is like, you know, the Frog engine, the Nimble engine, which is just 3 Nimble Beavers. We have our usual Spright lineup, and I mean, once you add all the stuff you like need in the main deck, it ends up being like 30 cards. You still have a lot of room, and that even factors in stuff like Maxx and Ash Blossom, so there's a lot of room to tech here. I even tried to look for some more interesting tech than just 3 infinite Impermanence, but ultimately did decide to keep these 3, as Impermanence is actually still, like, not the worst in this meta. It's not super impactful. It's definitely not nearly as impactful as it was against, like, let's say, Sword Souls, but, you know, in this meta, there's still a decent amount of things you can hit. Imperm being a trap card is still really good. That means it can not only not get gammaed, but it also can get hit by Herald of Orange Light, which of course is seeing a lot more play now because of the Shizu packages. So there might be more exciting and or better tech than Imperm, but I just haven't done quite enough experimentation yet to determine if it should be 3 Imperm, if we should be teching 3 other slots. A card that we're teching here is Dark Ruler no more, which we've teched in sprites before, but we're now actually playing 2 copies alongside 3 Triple Tactics talent. This is definitely a meta call to finally decide to play Dark Ruler alongside Triple Tac. For a while I was kind of debating back and forth between the two, but in this particular meta, when you have stuff like AA-ZEUS and other Shizu pile decks putting out like multiple negate inboards, on top of stuff like sprites, which also have put out a lot of disruption on their end board, Dark Ruler no more is starting to look a lot better this meta, even in the main deck. I'm normally not a huge fan of main decking cards that are really only good going second, like Dark Ruler no more, but this is definitely looking like a meta where it's being exceptionally good. Indeed, I could even see myself going down to 2 Imperm then up to 3 Dark Ruler no more as a quick swap for one of these Imperm slots here. Dark Ruler No More, its main strength over like evenly matched, for example, in this meta, is the fact that it can't be responded to with monster effects. So if you're up against like Adamantipator and they have an inboard of like Appaloosa, Borreload, Baron, IP, Block Dragon, Spright Elf, whatever, you know, you can just throw down Dark Ruler No More. They can't stop it with like Borreload, Baron, or Dragite's the other one I forgot about. They can't stop it with any of those. It's going to shut down their entire board. They probably don't really have anything left in hand afterward. The only disruption they might have left at that point is like a Shuffler or two in the graveyard. So Dark Ruler No More is very, very good. I think it is definitely notably better than evenly matched in this meta. Again, for those for being able to take out those Adamantipator / Shizu pile end boards. The extra deck is looking, I think, yeah, pretty much exactly the same as the iterations I would run for MCS when I was playing Pure Spright in the MCS. I was looking at the statistics on Master Duel meta and noticed only 5% of decks are playing, 5% of Pure Spright decks submitted there are actually playing Diagusto Phoenix. I think this number is absolutely too low. This is a tech I can say with 100% confidence is being slept on. Diagusto Phoenix is huge. It allows you to OTK in a lot of scenarios beyond what Cat Shark can enable. Cat Shark can really only enable a clear OTK with a clear board, whereas Diagusto Phoenix can OTK through monsters. You could argue that like you could just main deck a Spright Gammaverse instead to do that, and it does seem like Gammaverse is becoming a little bit more common. At least I've been seeing it more often in like the Duelist Cup and on ladder, in my personal experience. But I don't know, at the same time, like, I don't like the idea of Gammaverse only really being useful. I guess it's useful for clearing out boards of big monsters as well. I might actually be kind of convincing myself to try out Gammaverse here right now. Because I'm thinking about it right now, and I'm like, I definitely value the extra deck slot more than the main deck slot. Huh, interesting. Yeah, I'll have to think about that. Maybe trying out Gammaverse over Diagusto Phoenix, and I'd probably put Downward Magician back in the extra deck. We're not playing Downward still, because we don't have room for it if we're playing Diagusto Phoenix, and also if we're playing Underworld Goddess, which I think should absolutely be played in general, but also especially in this meta. This is really, really good for if you want to disrupt with IP, but you don't have a card in hand to discard with Knightmare Unicorn. You can just make Underworld Goddess with the monster you wanted to remove instead. On top of that, this card's ability to negate a card or effect that summons a monster from the graveyard, that's actually extremely relevant in this meta. It can stop any number of summons from the mill pile decks. So this card is looking exceptionally good right now. I like Underworld Goddess quite a bit in this meta. The other common extra deck monster that's currently not being featured here is Dark the Dark Charmer Gloomy. That one I don't miss at all. Downward, I know I've said in the past, like, oh, it never comes up. It very, 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 very occasionally does it come up, but it still comes up more than Dark really ever did, so I can see myself, like I said, maybe trying out a Gammaverse in the main deck instead of Diagusto Phoenix in the extra, and then we could try slotting Downward or maybe something else back in, who knows. We'll continue to keep testing Sprights, definitely. Pure Spright is definitely one of those decks, I mentioned this before, that is never truly solved just because of how flexible its tech slots are, both in the main and the extra deck. But alright, let's go ahead and break this list down card by card and take a look at some games. We're on 1 PSY-Frame Driver, 3 Swap Frog, 1 Ronintoadin, 3 Maxx, 2 PSY-Framegear Gamma, 3 Nimble Beaver, 3 Spright Blue, 3 Spright Jet, 1 Spright Pixies, 1 Spright Red, 1 Spright Carrot, 3 Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, 1 Nibiru the Primal Being, 2 Dark Ruler No More, 3 Triple Tactics Talent, 2 Call by the Grave, 1 Crossout Designator, 2 Spright Starter, 1 Spright Smashers, and then 3 Infinite Impermanence for the main deck. Extra deck is going to be 1 Diagusto Phoenix, 1 number 65 Djinn Buster, 1 Sky Cavalry Centurea, 1 Cat Shark, 1 Onibimaru Soul Sweeper, 2 Gigatic Spright, 1 Divine Arsenal AA-ZEUS Sky Thunder, 1 Salamangreat Almiraj, 1 IP Masquerena, 2 Spright Elf, 1 Knightmare Unicorn, 1 Mekk-Knight Crusader Avermax, and then finally 1 Underworld Goddess of the Closed World. There is our list. Now let's take a look at some gameplay. So this first match is going to be up against Runick Spright. I never finished this thought during the deck profile, but I think Pure Spright is in a better place than Runick Spright this meta. Not just because of the fact that Pure Spright has more room to tech, but Runick Spright in particular, that's also going to be very susceptible to the shufflers from the Shizu cards, being able to target the same thing that Fountain does, and then you don't get draws off Fountain. Also, I've found that, like, from the other side of the matchup, playing stuff like Adamantipator against Runick Spright, even their, like, seemingly endless stream of Runick spells is actually usually not enough disruption. There's a lot of ways to answer the fountain as well. The Runick side just doesn't really seem to be enough to combat the Shizu stuff, so... Anyway, we're going first. This is like a textbook opening hand. It's so good. Opponent's going to respond with a Maxx, though, to our Spright Starters, so we're not going to get to play out this, again, otherwise textbook opening hand of Starter, Beaver, and Blue. But the reason I did actually begin with the Starter was to see what all my opponent was going to be on, as far as, like, disruption goes. I thought maybe they would have an Ash Blossom, so I was like, okay, maybe we can bait that. Now, that maybe wasn't the best to beat it with Starter. But beyond just trying to bait a response to my opponent, in the event my opponent didn't respond here, then we can just special like a Spright Red from our deck, and then we don't have to worry about disruption like at all for the rest of the turn. So here when the opponent has Maxx though, particularly in response to Spright Starter, what I like to do is I'll just get a Spright Jet, and then I'll activate Spright Jet's effect to get Spright Smashers, set that, and then pass. That way we're not giving our opponent any draws off of Maxx. It's obviously, you know, not ideal to have to end on like nothing, but unfortunately, especially with a hand like this, there's not really a play we can make that's not going to give our opponent like at least 4 draws off of Maxx, and we definitely don't want that. There's like no inboard we can make that's going to be worth giving our opponent that many draws. So here we end up net neutral. Our opponent gains a net total of 0 cards off of Maxx. They basically traded their Maxx in hand for 1 card at the top of the deck. And again, we still have some kind of disruption set up in the form of Smashers. Of course, we also have Maxx and Nibiru in our hand here, which is of course very nice, but being able to search out this disruption is also very, very nice here. So I'm just going to pass it back to my opponent. I'm going to throw out Maxx during the draw phase. I've talked about this a lot during the videos, but for those who don't know why I do this, basically, particularly against 40 card decks because they're more likely to run this card, I like throwing out Maxx during the draw phase to play around Triple Tactics Talent, which is not seeing quite as much play as it did when we were in a more Spright-heavy meta, as opposed to now a Spright and a Shizu deck meta. But there are still a decent number of triple attacks running around, particularly in Spright lists, which of course are always going to be either at or closer to 40 cards. So if your opponent's on 60, there is still an argument to playing Maxx during the draw phase. It plays around stuff like Normal Summon Quagmire Guardian. It plays around Gamma. It doesn't play around Gamma, it actually plays into it, but Gamma's not really in that many Shizu pile decks. There's like very niche case scenarios where it's, I think generally it's still better to throw out Maxx during the draw phase. It's a little more debatable now, but against a 40 card deck, I'm absolutely still going to do it. So opponent knows they're under the Maxx, but even though they are just going to normal summon a Spright Jet anyway, I'm still going to chain the Smashers. You might be wondering, like, well, what was the point of playing Maxx if you're just going to use like a disrupted directly in response to the opponent's summon here? Again, it was mostly to play around Triple Tactics Talents, but not only that, my opponent could still easily have like a Spright Starter or something in hand for me to plus off of Maxx, and like, if they do, then we still get draws off that. But even if they don't, it's like, it's fine. Like, we can throw out Maxx for quote-unquote nothing here, but the thing is, too, our opponent's on turn 2, right, which means they can attack. So I don't want them to just OTK me through the Maxx. I might have Nibiru in my hand, but of course, up against Spright, they can pretty easily make the Gigatic Spright going second. Or just in general, not just going second, but yeah, they can pretty easily make that, and then from there they can just, you know, play through the Nibiru anyway. So, yeah, as soon as we summon our Nimble Beaver, the opponent's just going to concede. Pretty sure they just realized I have the ability to OTK. I think I could OTK with only Nimble Beaver, even if I didn't have Spright Blue in hand. Actually, I know I can. This deck can put 8,000 damage on the board in multiple ways with only 2 level 2 monsters. So, my opponent, also being a Spright player, I'm guessing just knew that I had game there, but yeah, that was a nice little duel, even though, like, not a whole lot happened as far as, like, the board state goes. There was still a lot of playing with and around Maxx in that game, which, as annoying as it may be, we do have to learn how to appropriately play with and around it, as long as it's going to, again, unfortunately, be a part of our meta. So, alright, there's that duel. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next one here. Alright, so here we're going to be up against Shizu Math Mech. It's very interesting variant. Opponent's on 40 cards, and they kind of just seem to be playing, like, the Math Mech, basic Math Mech package with, like, Shizus and Orange Heralds. I don't know, I'm not super sure how I feel about that, honestly, because, like, I don't really know what the Shizus are doing for you in a 40 card deck that's only based on Math Mech. And in my experience, I guess this could very easily be different with 40 cards and 60. When I tested in a 60 card deck, what is the max number you can have? 9 Shizu cards plus 3 Orange Heralds. I actually found that wasn't enough to make Orange Herald live. Orange Herald was very often, in fact, it was exclusively dead when I tested it. It was never even live for me, so that was an Emancipator, again, with only the Shizus as the only other fairies, which again is the case for my opponent here, but they're on 40 cards with Math Mech, so, I don't know. Either way, we're going to get to take the first turn here. We actually opened Swap Frog plus Spright Blue, so if we don't get interrupted, we can actually search Maxx and then add it to our hand off of this line. Our hand's obviously looking great, though. I did misplay, though. Like last game, I should have actually begun with Spright Starter to try to get out of red. Could have baited out an Ash Blossom, could have seen if they had a Maxx that way. And more importantly, getting the monster negation on board early is actually super important. I'm going to get blue for Jet, and then I'm going to summon the Jet to look for our Smashers here. And then I'm going to go into the Gigantic Spright. Again, the goal here is to search out the Maxx. I'm going to activate, but yeah, the opponent's actually got an effect Veiler here. Not an Ash Blossom, but a Veiler. So again, this was a misplay on my part. It's actually one of the reasons I wanted to keep this game is to, you know, really iterate how much of a misplay it was. So it would have been so easy for me to just play Spright Starter earlier. And then I could have, you know, had a red in place, sacked this Jet, my Gigantic would have resolved, and I could have gotten my Maxx plays online. But even though we did misplay a little bit, it's definitely not the end of the world or anything. We can absolutely still make plays here. And we also get to use Triple Tactics talent here as well. So we get to look at our opponent's hand and see what's going on. We see another Veiler. We're definitely going to have to be mindful and to play around that. I guess in that regard, I mean, obviously this is, you know, after the fact we know this, but in hindsight, it really wouldn't have mattered if we'd even had red, because our opponent could have just Veilered again anyway, but that still would have been better, because it would have made them use their 2 Veilers, right? And here we're still going to have to play around a Veiler here. This Orange Herald is dead, that's fine. This Callby might be a little bit annoying against my Spright Elf on my opponent's turn, but I don't really foresee it being a huge issue. Obviously, the card that sticks out most here is Math Mech Circular. We're absolutely going to use this to shuffle this card back to our opponent's deck. You might have also noticed that, you know, I went straight for the look at your opponent's hand effect of Triple Tactics talent. This is something I've talked about before, but, like, even now when I see people play this card, like, literally 50% of the time, at least this is how it feels, like, literally half the time, I'll be, like, you know, very anxious as they activate this. I'm like, oh my god, they're going to rip a card from my hand, this is going to suck. And then they just draw 2 cards, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's fine. Yeah, I still see a lot of people just defaulting, or what it seems like anyway, to default to draw 2 cards when they activate this card. And this is honestly the worst mode on Triple Tactics talent. Obviously here it's turn 1, my opponent doesn't have a monster to take control of. That tends to be the best mode. But the second best mode, and the best mode going first, is definitely looking at your opponent's hand and shuffling a card from it back into their deck. I'm really not looking to draw 2 cards, like try to desperately find a Maxx, because I wasn't able to search one out with Gigantic Spright. I'd much rather look at my opponent's hand and make sure that they don't have any plays. And this triple attack is like kind of the epitome of that. Draw 2 would have been so mid here, it would have been so mediocre, but putting this Math Mech Circular back is huge. Hugely disruptive to my opponent's plays. And even without that draw 2, we still have, you know, a solid enough line here, right? I'm going to start her for red now, much too late. I'll try to use the Veiler. I figured my opponent was just going to, or use the Elf, rather. And I figured my opponent was just going to Veiler it, but that's fine. I can still use the Ronintoadin effect from my graveyard. And I thought about maybe making an IP here, or keeping the Spright Red up. Ultimately decided keeping the Spright Red up was a little bit better, because again, we know the 2 cards remaining in our opponent's hand. One of them is the Called by the Grave, and then the other is the Herald of Orange Light. So we know that neither of those cards are really going to, like, you know, be a huge deciding factor here. So I don't really feel like, with the knowledge I have, I need to make IP. Here I feel like I can probably just get away with red, and then the Carrot that I'm going to search on my turn coming up here, or my opponent's turn, rather. And then, yeah, as soon as I flip a Spright Starter, I just concede. So, yeah, we started for Carrot here. That prevents Small World or Signet Mining from being an out. And then, yeah, I mean, between that and the Spright Red, especially given what we knew from our opponent's hand. There's really no feasible way they could come back from this duel. So there is that game there. Let's go take a look at the next one. Alright, so this game is going to be against an Shizu Chaos deck. This one is interestingly enough 44 cards and not the usual 60. I guess they're aiming for a more consistent build, which I can definitely, understand the appeal of. However, I think it's honestly, I don't know, I think it's better to go for 60 cards because, especially against a 60 card Shizu deck, it doesn't even have to be like a mill deck, but against like an average 60 card Shizu deck, you do run the chance of milling yourself out before you can mill your opponent out if you're not on 60 cards as well. Anyway, let's see. We're going to start with the Spright Starter here. This one is going to resolve. This one we definitely need to resolve, although to be fair, if our opponent had Ash Blossom, we could just throw out a Gamma as well. Alright, so from there we get to blue for... I believe blue for red, because we already had Jet in hand. It was actually kind of an unlucky hand in that regard. We opened Jet, both Starters, and Smashers, so that Jet was only going to really ever be a quote-unquote vanilla extender. Just another level 2 body to go into the Gigantic. Speaking of Gigantic, I'm going to activate the effect here. It does resolve, so that means we're going to pull Swap Frog out of the deck, sending the Ronin, linking off Swap and Gigantic into Elf. Elf's going to then bring back the Swap Frog to send another Swap Frog. I'm so sorry, that's my alarm going off. I should have silenced that. That is my bad. My bad, yeah. In any case, yeah. Here is the rest of the line. Like I said, we're going to bring back the Ronin and the Swap. Use those to make the IP Masquerena. Ronin's going to come back. Just to be an extra body on the board for either IP or the Smashers. We'll set the Starter as well. Just so we can flip it up during the drop phase. That'll let us get Carrot out of the deck. And now we can stop monsters and or back rows. So, admittedly, I'm a little anxious because I'm in Diamond 1, and usually if you make a full board like this uninterrupted, people just concede in Diamond 1 because, I don't know, they just do. it's what people do in Diamond 1, but I was a little bit anxious, so like, okay, our opponent actually stayed through, and they must have a pretty good hand. I wonder if they can play through all this, so... They're going to start with a no-punk Ogre Dance. I'll chain the Spright Elf to get an extra body on board, but I don't really feel the need to negate this right now. Here I'll get Spright Blue in order to add a monster. I will say this though, because I see people, if they have both Blue and Jet in the graveyard, most people actually summon the Blue, and I tend to think that's wrong most of the time. If your last card is not another extender to go with the Blue, I wouldn't summon Blue off of Elf. I would usually try to go for Jet here. Jet is better to summon during your opponent's turn just as a random extra summon with Elf, because then you can add Spright Starter, which can make your plays by itself. That way, even if your top deck is terrible, you can always have a play. Spright Blue, yeah, you get to search a Spright monster, but unless you have another level 2 monster on your next turn, you are going to have plays. So, in this scenario, I'm definitely getting Blue instead of Jet, because, like I pointed out earlier, I don't have any cards left to search with Jet, but... most of the time, I would bring back Jet to search Starter here instead of Blue to search a random Spright monster. So our opponent is going to summon the Yu-Gi-Oh! Punk something or another here. I actually thought they were on Pure Punk because they played this, but looking at their deck, no, they have like Necro faces that they're definitely trying to mill here. But as soon as this gets summoned, I'm going to go ahead and fire off the Spright Smashers to banish it. I like doing this here instead of using IP or waiting for the effect and using Spright Red, because this uses up our opponent's normal summon, so now they can't make plays without making extenders, which are more susceptible to being negated. But also, like, even though they did, I think they searched this out, right? Even though they did search out the Sharakusai with the no-punk Ogre Dance, this feels like bait. Like, Punk decks, I know, don't need to commit to their normal summons all the time like this. Sometimes they don't have enough in hand, they do. But this definitely feels like bait, and I want to make sure I'm using, like, the minimal amount of removal possible in order to answer it. Okay, following that up, our opponent's going to Deer Note and summon the Ziamine off the Deer Note. This I will definitely negate with the Spright Red. Again, I assume my opponent was on Punk here. Given everything they've shown me, I have no reason not to believe they're on Punk. But yeah, with Ziamine, I'm going to particularly sack the Elf to negate it. I want to negate and destroy it as opposed to just negating it. This is better to do when possible, especially against, like, like a stray tuner like Z. I mean, really leaving any amount of materials on your opponent's board for them to use is not ideal. So you want to make sure you're negating and destroying when possible. Your opponent's just going to concede in response to that. So yeah, that definitely proved to be enough. Even if it wasn't enough, we still had a Carrot to negate a spell or trap card, and of course IP to remove monsters with either Knightmare Unicorn or Underworld Goddess. But we do still have one more duel to take a look at. Let's go ahead and dive straight into it. And our final game for this video is going to be a Pure Spright Mirror. It looks like they're teching, I almost said texting, looks like they're teching an Apuria. So I thought it was actually going to be Runick at a glance just because I saw the Apuria, but no, it was another Pure Spright deck. Apuria in Pure Spright is like, I think it's kind of mid, honestly. Like, on the occasion when you don't have anything to summon off of Gigantic, like, well, that's the thing, you're never really not going to have anything to summon off of Gigantic. You're always going to summon Swap Frog, and if you don't have Swap Frog, or whether if you already have Swap Frog, then you can just search out a Maxx. So, alright, let's see. Our opponent, speaking of Maxx, is going to fire that off. Excuse me, sorry. Fire that off during our turn here. We had an Ash Blossom for it, but even though it got negated, we still have the True Ripple Tactics talents to activate here. Look at my opponent's hand. It's definitely very interesting. The Spright Starter definitely gives them away. Well, particularly the Spright Starter and the Swap Frog definitely give them away as Pure Spright. So I'm guessing this E-Tele is pretty much exclusively used for PSY-Framegear Gamma. It's funny, with the right opening hand, I actually would have taken E-Tele here, assuming my opponent was on some sort of punk plan, like if they had some more generic stuff, but again, the Starter and the Swap Frog give them away as Pure Spright, so I think this is pretty easy. I'm just going to put back the Spright Starter here. And then with what we set up on our turn 1 board, we should have more than enough to play around just like the Swap Frog plus E-Tele. Ronin plus Pixies might look like a dead hand, but it's not. Any 2 level 2 monsters is plays in this deck, which is pretty cool. So, gonna use the Gigantic to pull out a Spright Blue. I know I said I usually pull out Swap Frog, but in this scenario where we didn't start with Starter or Blue or Jet or any of that, we definitely want to get that line going. So, gonna get the Blue for the Jet, Jet for Starter because I already have Smashers here. I think I'd grab Starter in this situation anyway. But definitely going to do it here where we already have Smashers. We're going to get Starter. Alright, so here we have the IP. I'll go ahead and Starter for the Red. I actually did debate using Starter for Carrot instead to potentially stop E-Tele, but I just thought the Red effect was going to be a little bit more relevant here, or more likely to be more relevant here. So, opponent's going to summon Swap Frog. I'll actually let it resolve. By playing this and banish it with the Smashers, that way even though they have Ronintoadin engraved, they won't have any materials for it. My opponent unexpectedly fired off another Maxx, and I actually debated pretty hard as to whether or not I wanted to even respond to this at all. The thing is though, I didn't want to give my opponent even one draw in this scenario because honestly, because I knew what the rest of their hand was, right? I know the last 2 cards in their hand because they didn't have Maxx before, the second Maxx, so we knew that's what they drew for turn. We knew their last 2 cards are E-Tele and Driver. They've already used their normal summons, so even if they went E-Tele Special Gamma, they can't like tribute summon the Driver. Even if they did, that'd be a very mid play. And yeah, obviously E-Tele Gamma by itself doesn't do anything. So here, I'm actually going to chain the Spright Red and sack off my Elf to negate the Maxx. I wanted to keep the IP Masquerena just in case we needed it. But then, yeah, after that, Elf is going to bring back Jet. Again, Jet, not Blue, especially because I have 0 cards in hand. I want to use Jet to grab my other Starter to make plays. Now I'm going to chain the Smashers and banish the Swap Frog. That'll leave my opponent without a way to bring the Ronintoadin back. And again, I know their last 2 cards are just E-Tele and Driver. All they can really do now is E-Tele 1 Gamma and then not anything else. So that should be lethal. Like, that should be enough for them to not have plays. Even if somehow they have plays here, I can, as a last-ditch move, still make a Knightmare Unicorn and discard Starter to spin back one of their monsters here. But nope, that's going to be all from our opponent. They concede at that point, and that's going to be the duel. So that's going to do it for this one. Thank you for watching all these games. Now let's go ahead and move on to our outro. Alright everybody, thank you so much for watching all the way to the very end of the video like this. That means a whole lot to me. Not just personally, but it's also a great way of supporting the channel as well. if you're interested in supporting the channel in other means, you can of course feel free to comment and or subscribe right here on YouTube. I'm always looking to the comments section. You guys leave some pretty awesome feedback as far as like constructive criticism goes when it comes to deck building, gameplay, channel content, all that stuff. So feel free to leave your opinion down there. I will be sure to take a look at that there. And then subscribing is going to be the best way to get notifications of when these videos drop. That does happen every day, by the way, so if you're looking for daily Master Duel content, you've come to the right place. And there are more places where you can get some daily Master Duel content. If you check out the description below, follow the top link over to my Patreon page. There, for just $5 a month, which is as much as you pay for a booster pack, you'll find a lot more value than a pack full of filler over there. We've got some previews for content upcoming here on the channel. We've got some exclusive games that are only posted over on Patreon over there. We've got some Q&As, and then you can also have your name featured in this lovely credit sequence where I thank all of the people who are helping contribute over there on Patreon. It's a huge support to the channel, and it really means a lot as well. So thank you everyone who is donating that is featured here on screen. And again, you know, it's not just a pure donation, you do get some more daily Master Duel content over there just for being a part of the Patreon. But I think that's about all the time that I have for today's video. Once again, I just want to thank you so very much for sticking all the way to the end of the video. Again, it just means a lot, as I do put a decent amount of work into getting these videos out every single day. But that's about all the time that I've got for now, so without further ado, this is X-Lex. I'm signing out, and I hope you have a fantastic day.